What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, Doctor Don't Give a Fuck here, and we are back with episode 109 of the video game therapy series. Today's a very special day in the history of civilization in the world and my life because it is a new streak in the number of days that I don't give a fuck. If you're asking how many days that is, I don't know because I don't give a fuck. I don't know where I was going with that bit, but either way, I'm in a different mood than I was the day before, or 2 days ago, I suppose this was, in a bit of a less serious mood, which is good because I think seriousness is kind of an epidemic these days. Everyone takes everything too serious. And I guess some people, it's hard to say that outright because some people don't take anything serious to a point where seriousness isn't a real concept to them. So I guess I can't really say that people take things too serious. I suppose if you are taking things serious, you're probably taking them too serious. And if you're not taking them serious, you're probably not taking them serious enough. So I don't know what that nets anybody to do anywhere at any time. But all this to say that the other day I was in a stupid mood. So hopefully today is a bit better. So I was thinking about what gives me confidence as a person, as a human these days. And a lot of people get their self-worth and their confidence through maybe it's, number in their bank account or their money or their wife or something. But I think, and while there are certain material things that give me confidence, I'd say I have, my physical body gives me confidence to some extent. I guess so long as I'm able to mog the other person. I guess that, I can't believe I just used that verb unironically. But there's also some self-confidence in the physical aspect of or dimension of my being, which I won't completely ignore. There's also kind of a relationships confidence that you have. So me knowing that the people that know me know who I am. I'm not trying to win social credit every time I hang out with somebody. It's another thing that kind of gives me confidence that maybe some other people don't have if you're constantly vying for social approval. Whereas if you just don't give a fuck, then maybe that's just who you are. Maybe you don't have to be somebody fake. But anyway, I think what truly does give me confidence above all else, I guess including all those things, is just the mutual superfluity of our lives. There's not to say like the meaninglessness of it all should be or is some uniting factor, but in many ways it is, at least for me. There's some peace knowing that as serious or unserious as people take it, that all lives do eventually end in whatever capacity you think death or ends are. And it's not to be that you shouldn't ever take anything serious, but generally there's just a balance between when to laugh at life and when to really take it serious. And I don't know. I think it's easy to get too caught up in one mode or the other. So if things are going poorly, it seems like nothing can go well, and then you don't really spend any time taking anything serious because it's all kind of a joke. Whereas if things are going well, but then you're kind of fighting and holding on, you struggle to take things serious. So there's just some balance that I think everyone should strike in their life. I don't know where I got off track with this. This next bit, it's not really a bit actually. My next opinion here, I don't want to get conflated with any kind of I'll say even stronger opinions, I suppose, or even just any controversy or animosity that's on purpose. I think this is merely a thought exercise that may or may not reflect the actual opinions of the matter. But it's bothered me. It always bothered me when, and I don't mean to say that it. I hate that I have to mention this. I have to feel like I have to preamble this with so much. I should just feel comfortable enough to just go ahead and say it. So I'm speaking in the context of men and women. So I realize that there's kind of a third class of people that are insulted by the titles of men and women, or that don't identify by either, or have some kind of ambiguous genitalia. I'm not talking about any of those cases, which I presume to be, extraneous and not really the norm. Most people don't really contest much the concepts of men and women, at least the biological concepts of it. Maybe the social concept of it is something different, but I'm speaking here about the biological concept of men and women. I guess on one front, or the simplest way to put it would be a biological entity driven by testosterone versus one driven by estrogen. So those are sort of kind of a hormone-based biology classification on men and women. But it bothered me always that there was this like concept of equality between them. And this doesn't mean that there's not some inherent hierarchy, but it's like comparing two holistic things, like comparing the sun and the moon. It's like, I don't know that, sure, like one might be larger than the moon, or some might be larger than the moon, but like which is better? I guess it really depends on what context you're talking about. So it bothered me that there was this like, well, men and women should be equal, which I understand like the spirit of that statement is that men and women should be treated equally, meaning there's not like, you shouldn't discriminate on whatever you might call that, or however that might manifest itself based off of someone being a man or woman. But to act like as if there's like some, I'll say even moral value or economic value or really any kind of value judgment off of being a man or being a woman, like those things being equal, I think kind of defeat the purpose. Again, I would argue that it's similar to arguing like, what's better, fruit or vegetables? It's like, which tastes better, which is better for you, in what context? I mean, are you somebody that, only eats fruit? Maybe then vegetables are good. Or if you're like, I don't know. It just really depends. So I feel like it's just making it out to be a very simple argument where they should be treated equally. They should be treated equally in like this concept of like the soul. The soul should be treated equally. Like a human is a human. In the same way we wouldn't treat, a human from one part of the country or the world different than someone else, again, in theory. But ultimately, like, there are laws that govern different people from different parts of the world. So they're like, depending on what country they're in, they're treated differently. And that's just like, that's not necessarily a value judgment on like the person itself. It's just a matter of their circumstances. So same with like being a man and a woman. It's not that like they should always be treated equally regardless of context. In the context, sometimes it makes more sense to like prefer a man or prefer a woman. Again, I feel like anything I could say here could be misconstrued as being sexist, but if I'm trying to assemble like the best basketball team, no offense, ladies, I'm not picking a girl. I'm not picking a girl, or a woman. And that's not to say that they suck at basketball. It's just this context. I'm looking for like the best at this particular aptitude, which would be basketball, which, values height and stamina and speed and size. Those are all things that biologically men have an innate advantage in. So like in this context, I would rather have a man than a woman. It doesn't mean that like you hate women or there's some like, just in this context, it doesn't make sense to pick a woman. So in another context, like if it's, I don't know, like a peace treaty summit or something like that, you don't want like, it would make sense then to have like, I don't know, probably a woman who has less of an ego of some kind. Like if there's, again, I'm not, just because I'm a man, I'm more well versed on the things that we're better disposed to, I suppose. But to act like there's not like a context or a time and a place where it makes more sense to be a man or a woman is different. Is like, I don't know. It to me, it's just it bothered me that there's always like, well, there's this equality, and I understand that like equality should be like this inherent like, yes, it's like humans are equal. We understand that, but to say they're like the equality kind of also indicates that there might be no difference between a man and a woman, which there quite obviously is. Not only like, if I'm looking for the largest penis, I'm not going to ask any women because they don't have penises. That's an obvious conclusion. If I'm looking for the largest tits, probably won't look for a dude. That, again, it's not to say that one is better than the other. It's just what is the context in which I'm looking for a certain accolade. It's like, all right, well, in this context, it makes sense to have a woman or a man. So even in like in job discrepancies, I think it gets clouded to say that like things should be 50-50. Like we should have exactly 50% of women in all these different, like, we're never going to have, 70% firefighters as women. It's like, we just won't, because generally speaking, I'm not saying it's a man's job, but generally speaking, like men are the ones that are more willing to do that and more genetically predisposed to do that. In the same way we might have like nannies probably aren't going to be overrun by dudes, right? That's just a part of like their innate biology. So there's just an argument between like the social equality of it and like the practical equality of it, where it's not, I don't think it's not that I'm arguing against like the existence of women in anything. There obviously can be female basketball players and male nannies and female firefighters and whatever. But generally, I don't think like always going after 50-50 is like this, is like is a natural state of things. And if it wasn't for this patriarchy, we wouldn't have 50-50. I don't know that it's even like that. I think there are just very basic biological differences between men and women that I don't know, create a lot of these disparages that we see. So I'm not wholly convinced all the time that if it's something is not equal 50-50, it's like bad. Again, I think it's like just comparing the sun and the moon. Like if I'm cold, I want the sun, right? If it's too bright out, I'd like the moon. It really depends on what the context is. So I don't know. It just always bothered me that it was like equality, but equality inherently has like a value judgment aspect to it, which I think also just kind of like removes the nuance that is needed a lot of the times in like, well, why is a man doing this? It's like, well, is there nuance involved that it, might be, it might better suit a man. I'm not saying it couldn't be a woman, but maybe it's 80-20 in favor of, males dominating this. I don't think it's something wrong per se, but I don't know. The issue of it being like using the word equality or inequality to describe this scenario, I think is the problem. The other kind of larger issue I have with any kind of, well, I'll say just like social equality, is that I believe in large part, and this is more of an opinion piece than anything, I believe in large part that social inequality is often kind of a front. Like, like the difference between being a black person versus a white person, there's no doubt different, right? There's obviously advantages to both, depending on where I am. And maybe you can argue that there's, more of a financial advantage if you're a white guy versus a black guy. But ultimately, I think the largest disparity between anything in our current world is it's all financial. So any other like part of identity that is being compared or is unequal, it all kind of boils down to the financial part of it. And if you're a broke black guy or a broke white guy, you're broke. No one gives a fuck. You don't have any money. You have no sweat. Like money ultimately means so much more than any amount of identity does, which is part of like, I think my frustration and other people's frustration too, maybe just with like it being like, well, it doesn't matter if it's like a broke person is a broke person. A rich person is a rich person. I don't draw lines between like, I think I would much rather draw lines between the haves and the have-nots, which is kind of in the story of history throughout all of time. It's always been the have and the have-nots. Even Marx has the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. It's always been the haves and the have-nots, serfs and the landlords. It's the same thing. So now, but like, why would it be white and black now or male and woman now when it's still have and have-not? It's still what it is. It's no different. Like is there like, if you're a female billionaire, does it matter if you're like not represented? It's like billionaire is a billionaire. It doesn't fucking matter what they are. Like that is ultimately the line I think we should be drawing is if you have or you have not, and not like anything beyond that. And so I think anything that isn't kind of this have or have not financially, just because that's really the way that any capitalist system is built, is around the capital of the markets. That's the whole, the whole basis of capitalism is this, it's an economy or really a society driven by capital interests, which isn't to say it's bad. I'm not saying it's wholly bad. I'm just saying that is the way it's structured. So if we're going to look about inequality in a capitalist regime, we should look at that purely through the lens of capital, because that's what it is. Like if our entire society was based off of like social structures, and if it was like the church, then you could look at like social capital, and that would make more sense because that is the way the society is structured, and the markets are structured, and that's the way you eat. Is through your social capital of like where you are in the church, right? It doesn't matter. Money doesn't really exist in that sense, but because we live in a society where it is capital that does anything, the inequality should solely be looked at on the merits of what the society is built on, which is capital. So why are we arguing about anything other than capital, if that is really the case? It's like I never thought it was like good to draw lines on like, well, if it's a black child versus a white child, it's like, is it poor or rich? Does a child have money or not? Like that ultimately will determine far more in any of its future than anything else. So that should be, and sure, I realize that there's arguments around like, well, generally, like that's more wealthy if you are white. It's like, I understand that generally, but it's 100% if you're rich or not. So like, and I realize that it's not always easy or trivial to decide how rich someone is, but it's not that hard either. I feel like you can almost just look at half people and know whether or not they have money or not, or what capital class they fall into. So I feel like that, I don't know, it makes a lot more sense. Like even like in the context of a different culture. So like India with the caste system, it'd be silly for them to distract themselves on like, which offshoot of religion that they're a part of, when their society is built off of the caste structure. So then that would be where the source of inequality comes, is where in the caste do you fall, not which religion you fall under. I don't know enough about Indian culture to go any farther than that, but it always bothered me with inequality that isn't, if we're not debating that on the merits of what the incentive or societal structure is built off of. So since it's not really built off of a social class or social credit in any sense, it's instead built off capital, which is, unless you're arguing that we don't live in a capitalist society, then it would make no sense to make arguments of inequality if it's not around capital. So that's kind of my whole thesis with anything. I suppose as a secondary offshoot between like innate differences in men and women, I don't also think that there isn't I don't think it's necessarily the goal or even just like a great idea per se to kind of like blend or mold the two, meaning that I think there almost is kind of this, I laughingly put it as like a healthy hatred between the two sexes, but I don't think that is the best way of describing it. I just mean like a healthy mutual understanding and like mutual disagreement but it's kind of still built on like trust, where it's like in the same way that, you probably disagree with like your grandparents on the way things are now than the way they were, back in their day. You ultimately still trust them to be looking out for your best interest. In the same way, I don't know that like men and women should always be on the same page about everything. But generally there's some give and take to know when to like, when it's a man's job and when it's like, needs a touch of a woman or whatever. And that's like obviously a joke, to be, just be said in that way. But ultimately there should be some kind of healthy disagreement or give and take. I don't know that it's possible or even a good idea to like completely blend and say that like women need to be able to do everything that men can do and men need to be everything women can do. I think there's almost too much to try and like ameliorate there, and we should kind of let the biological differences be biological differences and instead address or accept some kind of mutual trust and respect for the other, in whatever context in which they need to be trusted in. So I don't know. And I guess I could draw more specific lines around those, but I don't think I want to, I get at risk of getting any more, misogynist than I already have been, but it's not the argument isn't around like that there's any better or worse. It's like, again, you're kind of arguing apples to oranges. I don't think better or worse is in what context is important. So I don't know. Anyway. I guess speaking of I guess meritocracies and I guess related to assessing the merit of different things, it's interesting to me that merit of any kind, if like I guess any kind of value judgment, and this is more of an employment in an institutional framing, so it's not not so much around I guess social anything like this. This is more about like employment, but I guess merit of any kind in the context of employment is rarely assessed outside of the merit within those institutions. So I guess, for example, if you were an academic and spent all your time and your career in academia, your merit is really only useful in the context of academia. Then no one cares if you go to like a hedge fund, you show them all this and like sure there's some like crossover, but ultimately that still like dilutes. They're still only looking at you in the context of how would you perform as the hedge fund manager or the risk manager, whatever position they're looking for you at now. Which isn't to say it's stupid to do it that way, but I fear that there's not really any kind of holistic judgment anymore. So if there were like literally the modern day Benjamin Franklin, who kind of did a little bit of everything in his time, he was like worked in a print shop, did a lot of writing, did all these like reading. It's like none of that. No one gives a shit about anything like about being like a holistic person or, having a wide range of skills. Unless wide range of skills is like needed on the, in quotes or something. Like there's not outside of the usefulness of those skills in that institution. Nobody gives a fuck. So like if you're a programmer, they don't care if you are like well versed in philosophy. Sure, it's like a cool thing to like yap about, or like maybe it's like a culture fit kind of diagnostic, but it's still culture fit only within the context of what institution are you looking to work in. Beyond that, we don't care about I'll say like the holistic merit of an individual outside of the merit that you have within an institution, which I think is sad to see like that as the direction we're taking, only because it's, again, I think making more merit or value judgments that are less and less holistic and more domain specific. As I said before, I'm not really a fan of the over speciality and trying to be the number one or best in the whole world at something. I don't know that not only I don't think we're predisposed to over specialize. I think we are kind of generalist machines. Not only like the whole risk of like, well, what if your job gets automated and you've specialized in, I don't know, something for no fucking reason, which is, I guess, one risk in and of itself. But I would even argue just from like a interest perspective, like I guess sort of having Asperger's or something, there's not really a lot of like, it's not your natural inclination to focus on microbiology research for, all of 60 years of your life. I guess unless you're being paid to do that, or again, like if you have some kind of autism or something where you like, truth. I think most people are kind of curious by a lot of different things. And the reason they don't pursue a lot of their other curiosities is that they're just like, they're not incentivized to, or they're actively incentivized not to, meaning that like it wouldn't help them in their career and like, they're wasting their time and they got other shit to worry about. So they don't bother kind of fostering other things they might be curious about, which I think is a mistake. I think part of what is a good life and the part to be taken seriously in some sense is to feed and foster the creativity on things, or just the interest, even the curiosity, I suppose, not creativity, the curiosity that you have towards subjects that again might be useless subject. It's not, the whole point isn't to like how useful is this knowledge, like every time you learn it, which I don't know. I wouldn't be like a career min-maxer and everything and make sure this is like the best career move or the best financial move. Because again, you can only connect the dots going back, and it's, I don't know that it's, I don't know. It's just not our natural mode of being to hyper specialize. And I think it's kind of wrong that institutions push, and that is kind of the common mode of being, is to try and be the number one best in the world at something. And sometimes it is. And I especially like I've noticed in like athletic pursuits, being number one in the world is, does have, there's a lot to that, because there is, there's glory in that. That's part of what we are built to do, is be physical creatures. I meant more of like in the context of being like a, practicing Excel on Sundays because you want to be the Excel champion or something like that. I just don't know that is in the same boat as the Olympics and shot put or something. So I don't know. I suppose that you could argue with me if you truly are interested in Excel and being the best in the world at Excel. I suppose now's your time to shine. But anyway, I just think I think more people than not have more broad interests than they do super narrow interests. I think the number of people with broad interests that purposefully hamper themselves to be narrow because that is what's incentivized, financially or socially, that is what I'd argue is more common than people, being forced to generalize. It's almost never the case. Like no one cares. If the office manager gets, starts reading a book on philosophy, it starts becoming no one cares about that. Or at least they don't care in the context of that office. And if you go to some kind of, I don't know, place where philosophy is analyzed, which I don't even know where that would be. I don't think academia has any decent conception of philosophy, I guess, after, the 1900s almost. A lot of the modern philosophers are just wordsmiths or just writers that write sci-fi pretty much. They're not even really philosophers. At least that's my opinion of it. So I don't know. I guess I'm not the one making the value judgments, but either way, that's my opinion. Anyway, so I don't know. I guess the underlying context being that I wish that merit were assessed more independent of the institutions, and there was a more, I'll say, holistic review or appreciation of one's merit, and not just within the context of how useful they are in some setting. You know, the best example being just like, you know, I don't know, I guess an academic being just an academic and not in the context of the actual, you know, merits of it. Because the academic is not only a small amount of their work is actually focused on, we'll say, like the pursuit of inquiry and scientific methods. A lot of it's just like, okay, well, how is this useful in an industrial complex? How is this useful? How can this research be applied to, you know, new medicine? Which realizes the point of science is not to say we should let, you know, any idiot who has theories just run in there and test them, you know, or doesn't need to be some loose basis in reality. But ultimately, there are sciences that are like the correct answer to like, how is this applicable in the industry, is to be like, well, I don't fucking know. It's probably not. Maybe it isn't. I don't know, but it's something that I'm interested in this and I want to study this. And, you know, people in society need some kind of excuse to study stuff like that. Because even if it doesn't seem useful to industry now, not to say they wouldn't be useful in industry later or 50 years down the road, but again, that's certainly investments that you can like write on paper and say, well, this will be useful in 50 years. It's like, no one's going to believe you if you say that. You know, not even that, like the other part about academia is that you have to publish a ton of papers on stuff, which, you know, is publishing papers equal to, you know, actual thorough intellectual inquiry? It's probably getting farther and farther away as the days go on. I would argue that maybe at one point it was probably a very close correlation. That was a big part of like kind of formalizing your writing. But a lot of times now it's just game to like, you know, get in with the publishers and like, you know, what is this crap? I thought the point of this was free inquiry and to learn more about the world. And now it's just it's another one of these stupid games where you have to like, you know, weasel in there and like know the guy and then like, you know, publish more papers than Jeff. Cause you know, it's like, fuck both of you. Fuck you and Jeff. This is bullshit. All of you guys are frauds. So I don't know. I'm not even in academia, really. I guess I kind of was, but it's just frustrating that is kind of the mode of what was once, you know, more, I'll say, virtuous free inquiry, and the place for people to study stuff that they're interested in. Now you can kind of do that, but most of it is just kind of empty red tape, I suppose. Anyway, we'll move on to something else here. Let's look here. Yeah, I thought it would be fun, or funny, I suppose, to psychoanalyze myself. So, back when I was more of a coomer, in the YouTube days, when I would watch a lot of YouTube, there was this guy he's still around, obviously, still making videos. Dr. Todd Grande, who would deliver like these. A lot of times there are criminal cases, but in this super like dead tone, monotone, deadpan like voice. But he would psychoanalyze people and like not really that, like not in the way you'd think, where it's like you know, Sherlock Holmes or something like that. It was closer to like, you know, why did this person commit this heinous crime? You know, and he would do it on the 5-factor DSM model, where it's like neuroticism, extroversion, openness to experience, or openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. And he would say like, you know, this person likely had high neuroticism and high whatever. So I thought it'd be funny, at least for me, to try to psychoanalyze myself, at least see where I think I stand on some something like this, a situation like this. That's what he'd always say. Anyway, so I just thought it'd be funny to try to psychoanalyze myself. So, and using the DSM-5 model. So, by the way, the 5 are neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. Those are the 5. So first, neuroticism, which is kind of what it sounds like if you're just a neurotic individual. This is not that you're like paranoid or you're a schizophrenic. I don't think neuroticism is slightly different than that. Neurotics are just like people who are constantly in this like maybe kind of constantly reassessing their own like default mode network, or just kind of constantly in rumination or retrospection about what they're doing or what they've done or what they've said or what they, you know, and it can make them good planners and good like I guess because planners often like can make these good post-mortem or pre-mortem judgments and then like try to plan out before that. So I guess neuroticism does have its benefits, but if I were to assess my own, I would say I am a neurotic person. So I'd say I'm high in neuroticism, just because I just think I have those tendencies to overanalyze stuff. I mean, for God's sakes, just taking this as evidence in itself, spending time and hours at a time talking to myself, analyzing very, very pointless or trivial matters, and I guess taking them serious and vocalizing them would be quite obvious of a high in neuroticism. Next is extroversion, which is a tougher one for me. So introversion versus extroversion. It's a tougher one for me because it's just so context dependent. And I feel like some of these would be too. I'm sure there are times or contexts where I'm not very neurotic, or at least significantly less neurotic than I am normally. But I think the judgment here is on like a general basis, and what the vibe is, what my own vibe is about myself. And I would say I'm probably medium to low in extroversion. I would say medium only because there are contexts in which around certain people, like I'm not even like around my friends and family, I'm certainly much higher in extroversion than I would be, but like in general, I'm not running around to socialize. I'm not quick to do that. So I'd say that I would be on the low in extroversion scale. Openness to experience is kind of like your like novelty brain, or like how much you kind of value, I'll say, just like novel experiences, or just like, doing something once, or just like how impulsive you are. I'd say my natural tendency might be higher in this, but I think I've done a lot. At least I've had a lot of like intellectual as well as like environmental effort to stifle my like impulsive behavior. So I'd say I'm kind of medium on this openness to experience. Whereas I'm open in a sense where I'm very interested in kind of expanding my horizons and just looking into new stuff all the time, whether that be new skills. I get bored with some stuff easy, and bored's not even the right word. I move on to it very quickly from the other. So that's kind of points towards a more medium to high. But I think because of my environmental factors, I do purposely stymie a lot of what would otherwise be like wacko kind of, I guess very random, very, I don't know, kind of very impulsive behavior. So like I keep a very, very clean room. I have a very structured and organized way of doing things. But that is not to say I don't spend time doing a lot of new things, because I always try kind of new systems to structure myself. So I would put myself as medium with openness. Next is agreeableness, which is hard for me because I realize that I constantly disagree with myself and with the prevailing wisdom of societal wisdom, I'll say, not ancient wisdom of the time. I almost pride myself on being disagreeable when necessary, meaning that if you need me to disagree with something, I totally can. Or I can find some problem with it. I can poke a hole in it. But I don't know that this is the context in which agreeableness as a like DSM-5 and analyzed trait should be viewed in. I don't think it's necessarily like, can you argue well? It's like, therefore you're low in agreeableness. I think this is more of like the context of how, I guess to be blunt, like how picky you are with certain things going your way. Which if you've actually hung out with me, but generally I don't really give a shit most of the time what happens or if my opinion is validated or not. I enjoy kind of the intellectual stimulus of arguing and being disagreeable for sake of just having something to talk about and having something interesting to discuss. But is it like imperative to me that there's some amount of agreeableness that happens? No. In fact, people that do just say, yeah, I agree with you, are annoying. I want people to kind of have their different opinions. And that's why I'll keep playing the devil's advocate until something we disagree on, I can at least get some kind of intellectual stimulus that way. Or at least get them to show more of their own selves or their personality or their opinions by finding, differing ground. But when it comes to like the actual practical, like, where do you want to go eat? I mean, stuff, not even stuff like that, but just like, I don't give a shit most. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. So I guess between those two, I could say I'm medium, or, medium in agreeableness, but the context of like, the context is like me in this scenario doing a Bucketz banner, agreeableness is low. But if the context is like we're taking a group trip and we need people to be on the same page, I really am all about sitting on the fence there. I'm not here to impose, and I'll have my opinion heard, but ultimately it's not, unless I'm, have so much to lose on this stupid trip. Most of the time it's so inconsequential. I suppose it'd be one thing if it was like, if I had $1 million on the line, I'd probably be less agreeable, I suppose. But again, that's almost never been the case where I've had any amount of stakes involved. The stakes have always been so low that I don't need to be disagreeable at all, because it doesn't fucking matter. There's no point. It hasn't really been life or death. So maybe if I was in life or death scenarios more, I'd be less agreeable. But given that the context of most, little arguments and things are so superfluous, that my agreeability would be high. So I guess I'll just meet in the middle and just say medium. For me. Next and last is conscientiousness. This is like, I'm not gonna say thinking of other people or like thoughtfulness, but kind of awareness of, I guess awareness of like not consciousness in general, but awareness of your own consciousness and the consciousnesses of others and the opinions of others, and the awareness, kind of like the social self-awareness, or the awareness about other people's needs and desires. And I hate this because it is kind of, it's, I don't know. No one really wants to be low in conscientiousness. That's not like a good trait, because that's, psychotic at least. But I would say in general, I do, because I'm high in neuroticism, I do spend enough time thinking about myself. I also can think about other people, so I can at least empathize with different scenarios. So I would say I'm medium to high on the conscientiousness scale. Of course, if you were an actual psychologist and want to psychoanalyze my behavior or my ruminations on these videos, you could have your own analysis. But nonetheless, that is still my own assessment. Whether that comes across as narcissistic or not, I don't know. But I would say I'm medium to high in conscientiousness, I guess. Beyond that, I don't want to try and argue that much, because then it just becomes, I don't know, then I just sound less conscientious if I'm arguing for high conscientiousness. Anyway, I thought that was interesting, and it was funny. The interesting thing, this is, by the way, I'm done with the DSM-5 categorizations. So something I thought was interesting, or at least maybe worth argument or rumination on some level, is the idea that the brain is mostly like an inhibitory computer, meaning that there are lots of, I guess that does make sense from a computational perspective, because you think about like the output we get from even just like an 8-bit computer is like a lot of visual and textual information that we can get even from like a really shitty computer. Not to mention the 64-bit computers and stuff we have now. But the brain is mostly an inhibitory thing, meaning that our actions and even our thoughts and our words and the stuff that we can observe following from like the brain working, meaning that when the brain is doing something, is far, far less than what the brain is doing behind the scenes. I guess the other obvious example of that would be like, there's obviously a lot going on with our brain while we're sleeping, but we're not moving. Like there's nothing going on externally that we can say that there's, look at all these computer, like if your computer was doing that, if your computer was doing nothing and running hot, like, dreaming, so to speak, you'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with my computer? Why is it drawing power right now? Whereas the human brain is kind of always on, it's still drawing power. And we don't ever really question like, well, what's it doing? Shut off, and, and stop eating or something. So I guess it does make sense, and kind of backs up the claim that the brain is mostly an inhibitory thing. So with that in mind, I guess to what extent of inhibitory like processes should we like embrace, versus should we strive to be less inhibitory in some way? So I guess looking at this biologically, I'm sure there's a good reason to have a lot going on, or good reason to have, I'll say high neuroticism sometimes, because you're ruminating on what the the mountain lion's going to do and if it's going to, attack you or something like that. And so it makes sense to have a lot of background processes going on. But on the other hand, it does consume a ton of energy, right? You can't really argue that much in favor of like dreams being like imperative to our physical survival, because they're not. Like if we didn't dream at all, we just closed our eyes and just powered off like a computer does, would we really like go extinct as a species? Maybe you can make that argument and say there's some like, God speaks to us through dreams or something like that. I don't know, but it's hard to make a direct argument that like dreaming or kind of wasting all our processing on the background is helping the survival of our species. Beyond just some kind of weird metaphysical, even like religious anecdote about the importance of dreaming. Beyond that, you don't have that strong of an argument, I would argue. But I guess in terms of more practical advice, like do you strive to be less inhibited and try to have more of your opinions and thoughts and things be manifested, or is the inhibition, you still be looking to be more, have more inhibitions between our body and mind? I mean, generally, just because I think there's a lot that goes on in the brain that we don't understand, and I think that is a big unexplored domain in terms of not even scientific, really. I'll just say, because it's not really scientific to like journey into the mind or be a psychonaut or something. But I would kind of fall on the behalf of being less inhibitory, meaning that we should spend more time trying to pull out, not only to better understand the brain and different, I guess, neurological quirks and things that people are wrong with it, because, neuroscience does some of that. But I just do think there's a lot more value there, and it's very interesting now that a lot of the macro mechanized world is well understood. Some of it isn't really terribly interesting, I suppose, unless you're like a chemist and big into this, or a physicist and big into like, the atoms stuff. It's not super interesting, how to make an atom bomb, I suppose, after you know how it's done. But what is interesting, at least to me, is what are all these processes going on in the brain? Why is it that, we have this like supercomputer, kind of this meat supercomputer somehow that is wasting processing power, watching TikTok videos? Why is that? And, you can be very reductive and just say, well, there's this chemical called dopamine. And it's like, all right, well, I understand that. But beyond that, like, again, is it really just like, are you calling our brains just like really, really bad computers, more or less? And maybe that's all there is to learn about it. But I certainly think there's a lot that one can learn really listening to the thoughts in their own mind. There's a lot that even classical physics and kind of our understanding of, and maybe that's even where the answer between quantum mechanics and classical physics lies, is in some unexplored domain of our own minds. Not to say that people tripping on acid or something are going to figure out are going to solve the thing, but maybe it will be. I don't know. I mean, it's just in terms of what's unexplored, I think there's a lot there. There's also a lot at the bottom of the ocean, I suppose. So if we can figure out a better way to, I guess, handle pressure under the ocean, that would be another cool place to kind of explore. But that's certainly a lot less accessible than just like exploring, one's own mind. So I would argue on behalf of being less inhibitory. Not to be, I know that like alcohol makes you less inhibited, but the point isn't to be a drunk all day and like you're somehow going to solve all these problems while you're hammered. But there's other ways of doing it, obviously, that don't also impede your ability to metacompute, because that's also, I believe alcohol just inhibits kind of all brain function. Not only like maybe like the stuff that makes you not say something or not think something or be unable to see something. It just fucks up everything. So it's not really the right substance for that. And there's also enough grounding that you have to have with other people and other people's brains that you can't lose the ability to communicate with others. Because I even said, like, suppose you did figure out like the whole answer to the world and that you've solved the universe and you understand how to do it, whatever. If you're unable to communicate that, or communicate that effectively, and you can do that whenever means that I guess somebody will believe you in some sense. But even like mathematically or using some kind of abstraction that is, I guess, logically sound. If you can't explain it, then what good is it really to know, right? Does it? How does anyone know that you know? Like you could just say that you know, but unless some idiot believes you, there's no proof really. We don't know. No one can validate that. And maybe you don't want the proof, and it's just you have to prove it to yourself. But then I'd argue, what is even the purpose of knowing, of having the universe's secrets if you can't articulate it in any way? Any way is meaningful to someone who's not an idiot or is willing to join your cult. So unless you're a cult leader, then it doesn't really matter whether or not you think you've solved it. Can you compel other people who are with questions and with skeptical opinions of your of the answer to the universe that you figured out? So I don't know, but you can't really lose that grounding either when being I'll say a psychonaut or someone who's kind of exploring the depths of the psyche or the inner mind. And there's people that I think did a really good job of this throughout history, through different means. Some people probably used a lot of drugs, other people didn't. I don't know. But like Nietzsche was famously someone who was so honest with themselves, they were able to like achieve, not even like the writings. Obviously, the writings have merit in and of themselves, but I think part of what made him even an interesting historical character and philosopher was just that his brutal honesty with himself and with others and the world, to an extent where he humbled himself. And not to say he was a humble person, but I'm saying in terms of his psyche, he was humble to the point where he could be brutally honest with himself to reach kind of dark depths. Now, he himself wasn't really that humble because he had this whole there's a lot of things that you read his writing. I've likened him to like the Trump of philosophers before. So I don't think he himself is humble, but there is a certain there's a certain humility in the level of honesty that he reached, which I think is laudable. Other people have had other interesting depths like that. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I could enumerate others, but that's I don't know. I won't do that now. Yeah, I suppose another tangent or something related to this is as given that our rudimentary understanding of the brain is like, oh, there's these chemicals that do this, and then we can make ads that kind of make people, it's like, I don't know, we've kind of weaponized a lot of what otherwise might be very divine or almost just kind of like very beyond the realm of scientific thinking, and we weaponize that to show people really crappy ads that they don't even have I say they don't even have, there's no emotional depth, but there's no intellectual depth even above that. So the depth of it is just purely at like this kind of instinctual level. And I think if we understood the brain more, we'd be able to maybe educate or have more efforts towards cultivating that sense. Because I think part of what is in the good life is cultivating your ability or cultivating one's mind and one body to their, I'll say their greatest potential, but it's not even like that's a point. I think it's just kind of a lifelong process of cultivating oneself to, towards a direction of sorts. It's not even towards some end goal. It's just in the direction of, I'll say even like subjective improvement or, even just harmony with oneself and the world or peace with one's own mind. Sure, we can call it that. But given that most of what we do now, and increasingly, I think, lacks even less than the what used to be kind of the historical or social depth. There's no intellectual. There's nothing. There's no depth at all. We're kind of appealing to whatever the very zeroth layers that we might understand about the brain instead of trying to reach any deeper. And I think in a big area where there's just a lot of uncharted territory is in, I'll even just say like pedagogy or like the education pedagogy of like how learning happens and how, because my theory on learning is that it's like, and it's not really a theory, it's just kind of an observation. It happens within the person, right? Like learning is really independent of the medium. The teacher of any kind could be anything. You can learn from a book, you can learn in a classroom, you can learn in a seminar, you can learn in a video. You can also learn a lot sitting still with your eyes closed, like in a dark room, in an empty, dark, quiet room, you can learn that way. So like clearly there's nothing external about the act of learning in and of itself. Now, most of the time, effective learning has some kind of external stimuli, whether that's a book or a teacher or a setting or an experience of some kind. Most of the time that's involved in learning. But to say that you can't learn doing nothing and just kind of being with one's own mind and having no kind of stimulus, I think is wrong. Because I've learned certainly a lot in dead silence, alone, in the quiet, with my eyes closed, with nothing going on, not looking at anything. I'm just kind of letting my mind think. And I've learned, a lot that way. So clearly learning is an internal thing, but how exactly best do we suit and when to know what, I guess, level of external stimuli is better for learning and which is not? So I think some solutions is to continue throwing external stimuli at the problem. Like, well, it needs to be interactive and virtual. Now it needs to be more engaging. We need AI and virtual reality to create augmented reality. It's like, I think given that many of the, our most prominent thinkers and philosophers and mathematicians didn't even have, had no phones and anything, Pythagoras, Socrates, all these people came to these, super wise conclusions and gleaned lots about the world, just kind of sitting there and ruminating. Maybe we don't always need more stimulus to be able to learn more. So I think part of what I think would be the goal of this, like, I guess, psychoanalysis in some ways, is to try and understand how learning does actually occur beyond just kind of very loose abstractions. We have loose abstractions and kind of very loose tendencies, but I'd argue that it's a very inexact science, in the same way that, like, psychology is kind of a very loose, inexact science. We should strive to make it more, at least develop or experiment with different pedagogical styles to have people learn in different manners. So I don't know. That's just kind of my theory, I think, on when something useful that could come out of people thinking and sitting around all day. So anyway, peace out. See you next time.